What continues to separate the great companies from those that are good and maybe trying to be great is distribution. Healthcare, particularly healthcare software, tends to be very sticky. Healthcare end users tend not to rip and replace systems. It is hard to go from 20 million of revenue to 80, 100 million of revenue with just a good mousetrap. You have to have distribution. You have to be able to sell it. And those that have been very effective at selling are brands that you and I know about today.
That's Joe Schauenberg, the head of healthcare IT investment banking at William Blair. And I'm Josh Nelson, the head of healthcare at THL Partners. And this is Healthcare in Action. It's a podcast that explores the latest developments and innovations transforming the U.S. healthcare sector, from cutting-edge technology to thoughtful approaches to patient care. I'm here with my colleague, Jon Lange, who will lead us in a conversation about key trends in healthcare IT, including recent AI-driven innovations and key considerations that will drive the M&A market for healthcare IT companies in the coming years. Jon, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Today, we'll take a closer look at a dynamic part of the healthcare ecosystem, healthcare IT and the capital markets that fuel it. It's a sector where innovation, consolidation, and investment intersect, and where technology is reshaping how care is delivered. Few people have a better vantage point on these trends than Joe Schauenberg, Managing Director and Head of Healthcare IT Investment Banking at William Blair. In this episode, I spoke with Joe about the evolution of the HCIT landscape, what strong advisory partnerships look like, and how mentorship and apprenticeship can shape the next generation of healthcare and finance leaders. We discussed the technologies driving the most excitement today, from virtual care to AI-enabled revenue cycle and practice management tools, as well as the challenges of selling into healthcare organizations and why distribution is a critical and often overlooked component of success. Joe also shared his perspectives on the M&A market, why top-tier assets continue to draw strong interest, how buyers are evaluating growth and profitability, and what management teams can do to position themselves for the best M&A outcomes. We talked about where healthcare IT is headed, why capital continues to flow into the sector, and what it takes to build winning companies in a rapidly evolving market. So let's get into it. Joe, thanks so much for joining me.
Jon, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Joe, maybe to start out, for those who aren't familiar, would you just tell us a bit about William Blair and the healthcare IT franchise?
William Blair is a global investment banking and asset management firm, 25 offices across the globe, been in business for nearly 100 years, headquarters in Chicago, lines of business being investment banking, private wealth management, and more institutional asset management. Investment banking is about half of our firm's revenue. In banking, we cover just about every industry vertical. Healthcare and technology are our two largest industry verticals. Healthcare IT sits at that intersection. And within healthcare IT, we like to think we cover the landscape of the category. We're organized into three different coverage lanes: one, provider; two, payer and employer; and three, life sciences and pharmacy. We have 25 bankers in healthcare IT that cover those three lanes, 5 MDs that are, in my opinion, superstars at what they do, and have been a very active group healthcare IT has at William Blair for a number of years, even before I started 19 years ago, but one of the most active sector teams at our firm.
Great. And I imagine most people watching or listening into this podcast will have a sense of what investment bankers do. But of course, there is a wide range of services and advice that you guys provide. And also, those relationships with clients look different depending on the situation, depending on the banker. And so from your perspective, what does a good partnership with a client look like?
It's a great question, and frankly, one that we're not asked that often. I'd say when people hear of an investment banker or investment banking, you tend to very quickly correlate that with a transaction, some sort of deal, some sort of capital raise. And that's by and large true. But as I think of a great investment banker, it's more of an advisor, more of an advisory hat that someone is wearing, where you're working with typically a very sophisticated audience to talk through a complex situation. Could be in the context of an M&A deal, could be in the context of raising capital to pursue some growth opportunity, could be in the context of how to create or maximize shareholder value by way of three different paths that a board may be considering. But ultimately, that advisory hat, where that advisor is leveraging data and objectivity and experience from their past and the areas that they cover or focus on, and applying that objectivity to the situation to, again, help that sophisticated audience think through the complex issue or problem or challenge in front of them that very well could lead to a deal. It oftentimes does. Oftentimes our incentives are linked to a deal or linked to an outcome. But again, I think the best bankers are those that are more advisors. And I think about some of my best relationships in the market. It's those that where, yes, I have advised or our team has advised on a situation, but that experience has led to a personal relationship where we enjoy each other outside the confines of a deal or outside the confines of healthcare technology. So much more of an advisor versus a, say, transaction specialist. There's many of those out there, but the advisory capability and success in that capacity, I feel like drives the best relationships between banker and client.
So, Joe, you mentioned the impact that AI is having and that some of these HCIT companies are bringing to bear for their customers, whether that's providers or pharma companies or ultimately patients. But is AI also changing the way that some of these HCIT companies are operating themselves?
It's a great question, John. I think it's early to conclude or to identify companies that are well out ahead of others. However, I think that's coming. What I would say, though, is what continues to separate the great companies from those that are good and maybe trying to be great is distribution. Healthcare, particularly healthcare software, tends to be very sticky. Healthcare end users tend not to rip and replace systems. It is hard to go from 20 million of revenue to 80, 100 million of revenue with just a good mousetrap. You have to have distribution. So to your question, I think certainly AI is driving more efficiency and faster go-to-market, faster decision-making at certain companies. But what I continue to fall back on is distribution being, the biggest differentiator in terms of scale and ultimately what drives success. You have to be able to sell your capability to that end user who doesn't want to rip and replace, who may not be open-minded to the next technology capability. You have to be able to sell it. And those that have been very effective at selling are brands that you and I know about today. They may not have the best mousetrap. There may be better mousetraps out there that have been developed in recent years, but it's hard to win the distribution game if you're a lower scale business.
It's really interesting, and it's certainly consistent with things we see in the market all the time, where I think someone who isn't super close to the HCIT market, or really probably any software market, might just assume that the best product always wins. And one thing we see over and over again is that hopefully that does happen, and I think that does happen in a variety of cases, but that go-to-market is so important. Distribution is so important. And there are some of these capabilities that, regardless of the specific subsector you're in, are really helpful to companies. And we like to think we bring some of these capabilities to bear through our own strategic resource group, but particularly in healthcare IT, where you're selling to end markets that are notoriously difficult to sell into, that are notoriously averse to change, it becomes even more relevant. And you have to focus on these things outside of just product to really make your company successful.
I agree, John. I think that's a good point. I mean, if you look at some of the more legacy areas, if you will, of, let's say, the provider space, like RevCycle, there are a variety of really interesting capabilities, solutions, automated capabilities that have popped up over the last 5 or so years, but it's hard to crack into the hospital when they have a partner like a Waystar or an Ensemble or an R1 or Change, now Optum, as their primary, healthcare or revenue cycle partner. It's hard to wedge into that relationship. So distribution, footprint, legacy relationship with that provider in healthcare is very hard to overcome.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the importance of mentorship. And I know that's something that you really emphasize and is really important to you. How do you think about mentorship and apprenticeship and investment banking? And what do you do to develop your team to make sure that they're not only getting exposure, but really developing the skills to ultimately be great bankers themselves?
Yeah, great point. Very much an apprenticeship model in investment banking. You don't learn by a textbook. You don't learn by reading case studies. You don't learn by being off camera or off mic. It's very much an apprenticeship model. And as a partner of our firm, I mean, so much of our future success as a firm at William Blair is predicated on our VPs, our directors, our more junior managing directors continuing to develop and being productive as they climb the ranks and become more senior. As a senior banker at William Blair, I'm very much judged on at the end of the year how much time and how effective I am in a mentorship capacity. And there's different ways we go about that throughout the year, some formal, some informal. But in terms of the sort of ethos that we carry with certainly our director level bankers, we are trying to get them as visible, as vocal in the context of a deal. We want them to be the vortex of information flow. We want them to be the go-to person for the CEO. We would love for them to be the go-to person for the managing director or partner at the private equity firm or somebody in the C-suite at the public company, if that's the context. Sometimes that's challenging. Sometimes the relationship is strongest with somebody like me, but we do a lot to try and push that person out into the traffic and give them the opportunity to spread their wings, give them the opportunity at times to make mistakes. If you're not out in traffic, if you're not out speaking up, if you're not out giving your thoughts and it's sometimes failing or being vulnerable where you may not always be right, but you're developing and learning, that's the only way, frankly, in my view, the more junior folks are going to succeed longer term. But big picture, very much an apprenticeship model and trying to get our folks out into the traffic, if you will, as much as we can.
And as you think back to your own mentors, is there one piece of advice that stands out that you found really helpful in your development as a banker?
One thing that I say to the folks that I mentor in certain situations where I'm speaking to our directors, I like to say people that walk out into traffic tend to get hit by cars. And that's a little bit of a morbid thought, but I think the more you're willing to get your neck out there, the more you're willing to speak up, the more you're willing to take on that next meeting or go to that conference and fill up your calendar with conversations, the more of that you engage in, the more likely it is to lead to some sort of opportunity. It may not be a mandate for a multi-billion-dollar transaction, but it could be a buy-side for a small situation where you're helping a principal or a VP at a private equity firm get up the curve and be thoughtful in the context of their team and ultimately be successful with an acquisition. It could be in a variety of use cases, but get out into traffic, raise your voice, speak your mind, offer your thoughts, do so diplomatically, but offer your perspective. Don't be afraid to speak up and engage in the conversation. And I feel like that's how, when I started 19 years ago, that was the push that was put on me, was not to, lock yourself in a room and do Excel work or create slides, but really get into the conversation. Everybody here tends to be a high IQ, did well in school, academically strong individual. So the tools, the fundamentals are there, put them to work, get into the conversation, get into the game, get into traffic.
That really resonates. And it reminds me of some of the things I say to RVPs as well. And what I find interesting about that is, as you say, these are real high achievers at organizations like yours and mine. And they nailed all the analytics and they've nailed all the tests in school. And sometimes it's not natural for them to just go out and hit the road and see what happens. And sometimes that can be really daunting. It's such a big world and they don't really have any relationships yet. And how do they even begin? And so I have a number of conversations quite often. Just start out, just hit the road. You're going to meet more people at a conference than you would sitting alone in your office. And so it sounds like that's consistent across both of our organizations.
Well said.
Looking ahead, what excites you most about the healthcare IT landscape?
Well, we've talked about innovation. We've talked about new capabilities. I think all that is very exciting. I think from an advisor standpoint, investment banking standpoint, there's so much capital that has entered the healthcare IT category, and there's a lot of capital still on the sidelines that wants to enter the category. There's also a number of companies that need to find capital or liquidity for the value that they've created over the last many years. There's going to continue to be a lot of activity. And as an advisor who is in the middle of a lot of that activity, I think it's an incredibly exciting place to be. It's an incredibly exciting place to learn. If I could rewind the clock 20 plus years, I think it's a great space to grow up in professionally, given that activity and the different business models that one's going to see, the different challenges that these companies are facing and solving. So I'd say big picture, the amount of capital in the space and amount of capital, again, on the sidelines that's looking to deploy in some way, shape, or form in the category. I think it's going to continue to drive substantial activity from a transaction standpoint over many, many years to come.
Joe, thanks so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
You bet, John. Enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to talking soon.
Thank you for listening to Healthcare in Action, brought to you by THL. To help Healthcare in Action reach more listeners like you, either share this episode with a colleague, subscribe to the show, or rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And for more background on THL's healthcare vertical, visit thl.com/verticals/healthcare.